And before we dive into that, I do want to say good morning again. My name is Dave Ovell. I get to serve as the lead pastor here at Hillside, and that does not look like that's going to stand up for me. And if you're visiting with us, I just want to say thank you for choosing Hillside. Thank you for coming out on a rainy day. And we would love for you to do us a favor of, if you could either fill out one of those cards that's on the table or scan the QR code and let us know that you're here. That would be great. We'd love to reach out to you and just connect, answer any questions you might have. Also, that can be used as a prayer card as well. So if you have a prayer concern, we would love to hear from you as well, and that will get to our prayer team. The cards you can drop off in the offering box, the QR code. The nice thing is it just goes right to where it needs to go, and we'll get back with you on that. But, so we're continuing our series on It's Your Call, the series on Esther, and I tried to tell you all last week, read Esther, read Esther, read Esther. I'm not going to have a raise of hands to see who all has read Esther or not, but yeah, some of you, yeah, teachers' pets, yeah. But I will encourage you, we're going through the entire month of November. It's going to be Esther, so if you haven't read the book of Esther, it's an easy read. It's a quick read. It's very much in narrative story format, and it moves along quite quickly. But just to give the kind of the summary real quick, in case you haven't read it, King of Persia decides that he's upset with his wife because she wouldn't come over to his party and show everybody how beautiful she was. So he decides she's no longer going to be queen, and so he gets rid of her. He needs a new queen, so he decides to have a beauty pageant to see who's going to be the new queen. And so they bring in all the women from around the palace and all that wonderful stuff. And Esther, who's a Jewish girl, she actually wins the contest. She becomes queen, and her cousin Mordecai, who actually has raised her because she's an orphan, he's there, and he ticks off this guy named Haman, and because he won't bow down to Haman, and because Haman's ranked high in the court and about second to the king, Haman gets mad, finds out he's a Jew. He hates him even more, and so he comes up with the plot to kill all the Jews. And Mordecai, of course, is all upset. So Mordecai eventually tells Esther, hey, you need to go and talk to the king and tell him that what's happening. And Esther's like, I can't do that because if I go into the court of the king and he isn't ready for me or he doesn't acknowledge me, he'll kill me, and because that's the law. And finally, Esther says, hey, I'll do it anyway. And then they go in, and then Esther says, hey, king, can I throw you a party? And he's like, yeah, because he likes the party. And then at the party, he says, what do you want? And she's like, hey, can you come to another party? He's like, sweet, yes, cool deal. And Haman comes with them both times, and Haman's all jazzed up because he's like, woohoo, the queen's inviting me to this seclusive party. It's like getting to Club 54 back when it was the day or whatever. And then she gets in there, he's in there, and the king's like, hey, what do you want? And she goes, oh, spare me my life. Someone's trying to kill me. And the king's like, oh, who's this wretched person who's trying to kill me? And then they go, oh, Esther goes, it's Haman. And Haman's like, oh, this is not a good party. And so the king gets all mad. He leaves and then comes back in. And while he leaves and comes back in, Haman is trying to beg the queen for mercy and falls down on the couch where she is. And that doesn't look good to the king. And long story short, they decide, hey, we don't want to kill all of my wife's family and people. And so we need to write a new edict that says that they can defend themselves. They defend themselves. Haman comes to a dreadful death, and I think Jessica's actually going to talk about that next week. And then Mordecai, Esther's cousin, gets raised to second in command just underneath the king. So there's the story in a nutshell. Whew. All right. So now that you've heard the summary, you really need to go through and read the whole story. The interesting thing, we mentioned this last week, never in the book of Esther is God directly mentioned. Not mentioned by name, anything like that. But you can see that God's hand was at play throughout this entire thing. So in our series, It's Your Call, Lessons from the Book of Esther. Basically, what we're trying to do is through these lessons, how do we see ourselves in some of the different characters of this story? And so today I want to talk about Mordecai. So this is Esther's cousin. He's raising her as his own daughter because she's orphaned. And so he's credited with this quote, which a lot of people have heard before. You may have, even if you haven't read through your Bible a whole lot, you may have heard something similar to this. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. And this is kind of, Hollywood has taken that last phrase, for such a time as this, like, this is your moment. This is your opportunity. And really, there are all sorts of movies, if you look at the plot, comes down to, hey, this might be your moment. This might be the opportune time. Now, if you remember way back in Pirates of the Caribbean, the first one, the best one, maybe should have stopped after that one, right? There's a moment where Jack Sparrow, the good bad guy, the bad good guy, the pirate that you like and you're not sure if that's a good thing. So he's talking to Wesley, who loves Elizabeth and is trying to figure out a time to tell her his feelings. And there's like this time where if you're watching the movie, you're like, and this is it. And he says nothing, and Jack Sparrow comes up and says, if you were looking for the opportune time, that was it, right? And how many of us in our lives, we are waiting for an opportune time for something, and we're waiting, and we're looking, and sometimes it's not until it passes that we go, oh, that might have been it. That might have been the moment where I should have stepped in and said something or whatever. So we're going to take a look at this real quick. But so here's the summary of Mordecai. Like I said, he raised Esther as his daughter. He told her not to tell anyone that she was Jewish. When she was going for this, hey, pick your queen contest, he said, don't let anyone know you're Jewish, because he knew there was still a little bit of animosity with some folks with Jewish people. And he's like, don't let them know, because that could end up being bad for you. He actually stopped an assassination plot. Two of the royal guards were actually plotting to kill the king. And so Mordecai, after Esther gets taken in for this contest, which, by the way, you didn't volunteer for this beauty contest. They just gathered you all up and said, you're in it. And so once she was taken to the palace, Mordecai would just every day go walking along the gates to try to find out what's going on with Esther, how's she doing, what's happening, kind of thing. While he was there one day, he overhears a plot of two guards who are going to try to kill the king. And so he tells Esther, hey, you need to let the king know that these guys are trying to kill him. They do some investigating, find out that he's right, and voila, assassination attempt is halted. And at this time, no honor given to him whatsoever, no thank you card, nothing. But he made Haman very angry. Haman is the bad guy, the bad guy, because he wouldn't bow down. Haman was second in command and was like, okay, everybody needs to bow down to me and treat me like royalty, almost like deity. And Mordecai is like, no, I'm not going to do that. Now, it doesn't say in Esther that he said, no, I'm not going to do that because I only bow down to one king. But it's very much implied that he's like, no, the only person I'm going to bow down to is God. And so he made Haman really angry. And so Haman is like, oh, I want that guy Mordecai dead. And when he found out Mordecai was a Jew, he's like, oh, I want to kill all his people in the land. So then Mordecai told Esther to approach the king. He's like, hey, Haman has written up this edict that we're all to be killed. You need to go talk to the king. And like I said, that sounds easy, except he knew and Esther knew if Esther tried to go in to meet with the king without the king saying, hey, Esther, come on in, that was a death sentence. There was no arguing, nothing. It was just, if you tried to approach the king and he did not invite you, then that could cause your death. But Mordecai, knowing this, is like, Esther, you got to go talk to him. You got to talk to the king, because if you don't, our people are going to get slaughtered. Then Esther said, okay, but then you're going to have to fast. And when you fast, prayer goes with it. So they fasted for 3 days. He actually kind of gathered up as many people as he could and let everyone know, hey, we need to be fasting for 3 days. Then he's honored by the king. One night the king can't sleep, And he's like, hey, somebody, I like me. I want to hear more about me. Somebody read the book about me. And so they pulled out the book about him and just started going through and saying, okay, this is what you did today, and they got to the part where Mordecai actually stopped the assassination attempt. And he's like, oh, that was a nice thing for somebody to do. What do we do for him? And they're like, nothing. He's like, oh, well, that's not good. We need to do something. So he decides that he's going to honor Mordecai, and so I think Jessica's going to talk more about that next week, possibly. If you want to know more about how that happened, read Esther. Okay, and then eventually he became second only to the king. So that's a quick summary of who Mordecai is, in case you haven't read the book of Esther. But I want to tell you, you should read the book of Esther. All right, you got 2 more weeks left. Get it done, and it is a really great read. But I want to talk about someone who, in my life, became known for his catchphrase. You know what you should do? Have you ever had someone approach you asking you that question? Like they just walk up to you and they're like, hey, you know what you should do? Now, this guy's named Keith, and he lives in the Chicago area. I actually met him years ago when I was just younger in student ministry. And he was the vice president of an organization called Lead 222, which was a coaching ministry for pastors, youth leaders. And so I got connected to him through that. And it didn't take me very long to discover that Keith oftentimes would start a conversation with a person and go, you know what you should do? And at first, I was like just a young buck in student ministry, and I was just like, no, I don't. What should I do? What should I do, right? I'm just like, okay, you're leading this massive ministry as well as all these other things on the side. You've got it going, okay, what should I do? What should I do? And then eventually it kind of almost got to the point, I'm like, Keith, do you start every conversation with, do you know what you should do? And in fact, in Lead, a bunch of us guys would get together and we'd be talking about all the different times that Keith came up to us and said, do you know what you should do? And we all started laughing. It's like, what is the deal with Keith always asking? And then we determined, the whole phrase, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours? We determined that Keith has a slightly different phrase. It's, you scratch my back, I'll find someone to scratch yours, right? It's just, he is that kind of networker. He's that kind of, hey, I can see people and what they need and all that. And really, honestly, Keith had this interesting ability of being able to see a situation that you were in, grasping your gifts and your talents and your abilities. He was quickly able to say, hey, you know what you should do? It wasn't for him and his glory. It wasn't that he was trying to manipulate you or be in charge. He was just simply saying, hey, this is what I see. Do you know what you should do? And I remember in one of my ministries, student ministry, it was growing. We were having all sorts of fun, and I was just telling him all this stuff. And he sat down with me, and I'm just going over. I'm like, yeah, we're growing, and this is happening, this is happening, this is happening, all this is happening. And he stops me and he goes, you know what you should do? I'm like, no, what should I do, Keith? Like, you should give some of that up. Now, I'm young. I'm like, give some of this up? What are you talking about? No, this is fun. Why would I want to give this up? This is happening. He's like, yeah, no, you should give some of that up. You need to, you know what you should do? You should invest in your volunteers and less in your students at this point. And that seems so foreign to me as a student ministry pastor. Invest less in the students. I'm the youth pastor. What are you talking about? And he's like, yeah, but if you're the only one speaking into their lives, you're capping how many students can be reached. But if you invest in your volunteers, more and more students can be reached. So, and I thought about it. I'm like, man, Keith, you might be onto something there. And so I put it into practice. All of a sudden, lo and behold, it was amazing. The amount of spiritual growth now that was starting to take place because students had more adults to connect with that knew and kind of understood their life situation. And so Keith wasn't trying to manipulate or anything like that. Keith was simply saying, hey, I'm seeing this scenario. Do you know what you should do? And I feel like Mordecai is cut from the same cloth as Keith. Because, again, he's famous for such a time as this. But here's the whole verse. Esther chapter 4, verse 14. And he's talking to Esther, and he's like, hey, there's been this law, basically, that's been put out that on a certain day, people are allowed to just hunt us down and kill us, plunder, take all of our belongings. They're trying to wipe us out. And he said, don't think that you, even as queen, are going to live through this. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Now, we often jump right to that last part. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. But look at the line right before this. But you and your father's family will perish. He was saying, look, you know what you should do? You should go talk to the king. And the reason why is if you don't, it's not going to be just on other people. This is going to come back to you, Esther. It's going to be you, and it's going to be your family, which includes me and all the people you grew up with around me. There's serious consequences. Now, at the same time, Mordecai knew, hey, this is going to be dangerous. This isn't going to be an easy thing to do. I know I'm asking you to do something big here, but I'm needing you to really think through the consequences of not acting, of just sitting by. You may think it may be the easy thing to say, no, I'm comfy. I've got the castle. I'm queen. I'm going to be okay. And he's basically saying, don't just think of yourself, because even that's not going to happen for you, but think of everyone else as well. Question I have is, do you have a Mordecai in your life? Do you have someone in your life that is able to look at you, see your gifts, see your talents, see your abilities, see the situation that you're in, and be able to make the suggestion, do you know what you should do? Now, the interesting thing with Mordecai is it wasn't just, hey, this is my thoughts or whatever. He had taken the time to fast. He'd been pacing. He'd been in the scenario. It's not just from his own wisdom that he's suggesting this, but he's saying, Esther, I'm asking you to do something very difficult, but I am feeling you're called to this moment. Do you have a Mordecai in your life? Do you have someone in your life that can look at you and say, look, I see your gifts. I see your talents. I see your abilities. I know the situation you're in. And this is what I feel God is calling you to do. It may not be easy. It might be difficult. But I feel this is what God is calling you to do. Do you have that person? Because sometimes it's difficult to go through life and see it all on your own. You know, we all have blind spots. We all have times where we don't see what's right in front of us. And it's so helpful for us to have godly people around us who can say, you know what? This is what I'm seeing. You know what you should do? And we need people who are going to be able to, like Mordecai, even when it's difficult, say, hey, I know this sounds like a big deal, because it is. But I really feel like God's saying, you should do this. See, that's one thing I really love about Mordecai is he knew. He knew it was going to be a challenge. But he knew what the right thing was to do. He knew why Esther was placed in the situation that she was placed in. Why she was picked as queen. Out of all the women that were there, why she was picked as queen. And so he wasn't going to just be easy and go, oh, you know what, Esther, I don't want to put this on you. I know this is a burden. I know this is difficult for you. Okay, so I'm not going to say, I'm just going to let you live your life. I'm going to let you live in ignorance and not understand what's going on. No, he's like, I need to speak truth to you right now. Do you have a Mordecai who can speak truth into your life? Or another question, is God calling you to be a Mordecai? Are there people around you that you can see so clearly the direction that God may have laid out for them, and they're not seeing it? Is God calling you to be a Mordecai to say, maybe God has placed you in this position for such a time as this? Is God calling you to be a Mordecai, and you know it? You know there's people you need to be having conversations with, but you're hesitant because they're difficult conversations. And you don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to make someone's life seem more difficult. But you feel so sure that they're missing God's will and God's plan for their life. Sometimes it's difficult for us to talk to family members about faith because we don't want to disrupt the family. But sometimes we need to be a Mordecai and speak truth. And just say, hey, you know what? I love you. You know I love you. And the only reason I'm going to bring this up, I need to just share with you what it means to be a Christ follower. I need to share with you the need for everyone. And man, I want to tell you my faith story of just what God has done for me. Because if we're not a Mordecai in those situations and we just let them go, it'd be the same as Esther, Mordecai letting Esther go. It wouldn't have ended well for her either. And sometimes we can tend to value calmness over truth. Now, I'm not saying sacrifice a relationship. I'm saying have a conversation in a loving, caring way. But we can't value calmness over truth. We need to be willing to stir the pot a little bit to say, hey, but I've got to tell you the truth. You need to hear this. And I'm sharing this with all the love and concern in my heart with no, I'm not trying to be mean or cause harm at all, but I need to share this with you. So I believe that we need to be both. Right? Can you imagine having a strong Mordecai in your life, someone who can truly just be honest with you? How just awesome that can be. Just having someone that you know you can go to and say, hey, shoot straight with me. What do you think about this situation? And they can say, you know what? You know what you should do? And you know they care for you. You know they love you. You know they just want the best for you. And so when they speak into your life, it carries weight. I'll tell you what, I love having Mordecais in my life. There are times where a Mordecai has come up to me and said, not just, do you know what you should do? It's like, do you know what you shouldn't do? And man, I love when they can speak that truth and save me from a bad choice, pain, needless struggle. So I know we need Mordecais in our lives, and you know what? In order to have Mordecais in people's lives, we need to be Mordecais. We need to be willing to be bold, and we need to be strong, and we need to be caring and loving and be able to speak truth to people. Now, here's the interesting thing. If you read the story of Esther, not once is Mordecai going, hey, I want some credit for what I'm doing here. Not once does Mordecai go, hey, king, I saved you. They were going to try to kill you. I'm the one who came up with and told you what was going on. Not once does he ask for that. Not once does he ask Esther afterwards, hey, could you talk to the king and see, I could get some credit for any of the stuff I've done? For even, come on, I raised you and you're the queen now. I should. No, he was always in the background until the very end of the story where the king is like, hey, you know what? Hey, this Mordecai, yeah. He's the one that saved me, and now I find out that, he raised my queen and all this fun stuff, and then he ends up getting elevated. And I'm not saying we should be Mordecai's to get elevated. I'm saying we don't need to seek out credit. We can remain humble and just have those conversations with people. And when they make the decisions, we don't have to go, hey, guess who told him to do that? That was me. Just want to make sure everyone knows that brilliant decision was made. No, that's not a Mordecai. A Mordecai is like, oh, praise God. That's awesome. You're doing what God has called you to do. And nothing is more beautiful than seeing someone doing what God has called them to do. And who knows, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Let me encourage you this way. In your life right now, there may be an Esther or an Evan that you need to be a Mordecai to. That this is your moment. That God has called you to this relationship. That God has put you in their life so that you can shine a light on the path that He is directing for them. That you can encourage and strengthen them and say, maybe God has called you for this particular choice. And you can be there to support and encourage them in that way. I've said it quite a few times. I think we've done ourselves a disservice when we talk about, well, it's a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, which the original meaning is, yes, you need to make that choice on your own. It's not like, oh, grandma was a Christian, so we're all a Christian. No, it's you make that decision. But now we've made it, well, it's a personal relationship, so I'm going to keep it personal. I'm going to keep it quiet. No. That's not what is meant by that. We need to be sharing God's love, God's grace, God's mercy, God's justice, God's holiness with those around us. So do you have a Mordecai? If you don't have a Mordecai in your life, I would suggest you start praying for a Mordecai. And who are you to be a Mordecai for? And I would suggest you simply pray, God, am I to be a Mordecai for someone? Who is it? And God might be saying, not yet. Hang on. Not yet. But as we continue to pray in that way, who should be my Mordecai and who am I a Mordecai to? Oh my goodness, then the body of Christ begins to work together like it's supposed to work, right? The church is supposed to work together. We're not supposed to be just a bunch of individuals doing our own individual thing. We're supposed to be a body. And when we start operating and working together, man, amazing, amazing things can happen. Who's your Mordecai and who should you be a Mordecai to? Let's go ahead and pray. God, we just thank you for today. We thank you for the opportunity again to gather. And God, I just ask that, again, you would just speak to us. God, as we go out this week, God, help us to search for a Mordecai, someone that can keep us accountable, someone who can speak truth into our lives that we know love us. God, someone that we know is following you, striving to be the best disciple they can be. And God, help us, when called upon, to be a true Mordecai to others. And God, right now, I want to lift up our neighborhood to you. God, as Hillside Community Church, God, help us help us to be able to be a part of this community. Help us to be able to connect with people outside of those within these walls, that we can just really be able to share your love and truth. God, help us to know the words, to be able to share with them, to let them know what it really means to be a Christ follower. God, help us to reach out to our neighbors, coworkers, family, friends. And it's in your name we pray. Amen. Thank you for being here. Again, if you want to be a part of the prayer service, it's downstairs right after the service here. And next week, Jessica is going to be sharing about Haman. So read up on Esther. Thanks. Have a great week in the Lord.